Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I like to discuss the news that certain traders are waking up to the impact of Brexit, particularly in the single market. We're starting off with the news that Marks and Spencer are closing stores in France and citing Brexit supply problems as the reason. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So in terms of impact, this is hardly the most devastating impact of Brexit. The loss of stores in France will cost some jobs in Britain, but the impact of closing 11 stores in France will surely be limited. But it's symbolic. I've talked recently about how the head of Marks and Spencer was complaining about how Brexit was harming the retail giant and pinning the blame of spurious nonsense to try and prevent difficult questions about why he supported Brexit, even though it's now making it impossible to do his job. That job being to grow profits for Marks and Spencer. The specific issue here is the supply of food. Marks and Spencer stores stock sandwiches, other prepared food items. Absolute non-starter with the extreme Tory Brexit that we got. If you prepare items like these in Britain, like sandwiches for example, they have to be exported to your French stores really quickly. They will have a very limited shelf life. But it is impossible to transport food items like these quickly. A combination of the time taken for checks, all sorts of checks as well. Checks on rules of origin, not just that your consignment contains what you say it contains. All sorts of things. You know, the lack of sufficient capacity at Dover to manage all this. The lack of lorry drivers, all making it unrealistic to make sandwiches in Britain, sell them in France. No nonsense about the pandemic either. Supply chain problems since Brexit had made it near impossible to maintain standards of food supplies. That's what they said, according to the BBC report. They also said they had no workable solution. Now, I thought this was an odd statement, being honest. At the start of the year, the government were actually encouraging businesses to set up centres in the EU, subsidiaries, to manage the changes. Oh, you struggle to export stuff to the EU? Set up an area in the EU for your EU customers. Why don't you do that? And some larger companies did exactly this. It's cost them profit still. It's moved jobs out of Britain. You know, they've had to sack or move staff from British bases and set them up in the Netherlands or France or Ireland, for example. You know, it's a hassle for them. Not only is there a cost in relocating part of your business, but you need to run your operations in multiple countries with multiple different legal systems. Marks and Spencer, unlike a lot of small businesses hit by Brexit, had the resources to have done this themselves. But they didn't. You know, they didn't just set up a production facility in France. But, you know, they're closing down 11 stores and giving it up as a bad job. But I'm not really sure that they can claim that they had no workable solution. Now, shifting production for its Paris stores would have been a workable solution, just one that they didn't want to take. In actual fact, I did see someone make a very good point that Marks and Spencer seem to require that the food be produced in Britain, because apparently that's their unique selling point in France. Though it's British food. I'm not sure why that impresses people in Paris, but apparently that is their thing. So they couldn't just move the facilities to France, which is, you know, okay, I can sort of get that. But what if they'd moved it to Northern Ireland, this person was suggesting? Then it could still be labelled as British, and because it's Northern Ireland, it'd be free of all that customs and SPS nonsense for sale in Paris. Best of both worlds. Boris Johnson promised Northern Ireland would get the best of both worlds. Why didn't Marks and Spencer do that? You know, however you look at it, there was a workable solution. They just either couldn't be bothered or there was some other reason not explained for them not pursuing it. Was it related to the fact that Marks and Spencer may be not aware of this or not aware of it in time? Bear in mind, as I said, their boss, Archie Norman, I think his name was claiming recently that he didn't understand what Brexit was going to do to his business. He didn't understand. That means he didn't hire someone to explain it to him. So they could have had this facility set up in Northern Ireland last year in plenty of time. They didn't do that because they weren't aware they needed to. And now obviously they just feel it would take too much time, I guess. But this is just the latest example of a successful business that's had to shrink that successful business for no reason other than Brexit. Not the pandemic, not a failure to innovate, not bigger players muscling in on their patch. Brexit. It's not just food either. That's just the hardest hit. There was a report of an insulation manufacturer not too far from me that reckons it's lost 300,000 in lost sales this year because of Brexit. Shipping to the EU has been a nightmare for them. They put this down specifically to the bureaucracy, tax complications, high cost of shipping, and the delays in shipping, meaning, that what used to be a market that accounted for 20% of their sales is now only 3%. That business did go as far as setting up a subsidiary in the EU as well, because they don't want to lose that business. They do want to recoup some of it over time. It's enough money lost for it to be worth their while. Even though that still represents a loss of revenue overall, they'll never get back up to the profits they were unless they grow, because they're having to now run offices in multiple countries. Then there was the fish merchant. Some of you may have seen this. It's been a BBC clip flying around where a woman was pointing out that a crate used to cost £3,000 before Brexit, now costs £14,000. Not just inflation, that is it. That's Brexit. And she said it was Brexit, but then the BBC cut it and went, could you do that again without blaming Brexit? Whereupon she sarcastically said, this used to cost £3,000 before Brexit because it's nothing to do with Brexit. I'll link the clip below from Twitter, worth a watch. But look at that, from £3,000 to £14,000. Yeah, sure, inflation is high right now. It's not over 400%. And actually, much of the high inflation we have right now is driven directly by Brexit. But yeah, going from £3,000 to £14,000 in a year, that's not just inflation. So that's another business, as well as a load of consumers, suffering. Because when the business involves us exporting, which is how a country makes its money, the business definitely suffers because it can't sell as much. The consumer in the EU may do, but equally they may get what they need for the massive single market where they can shop hassle-free. But Brexiteers don't care about EU consumers anyway, so we'll move on. But when we're talking about businesses that need to import from Europe, not even just the EU, she was saying some of this stuff comes from Turkey. Still has to come through. The British business, therefore, doing the importing, that definitely suffers because they have to pay so much more. It's much more difficult for them to sell for a decent price. And the consumer suffers because either they stump up 5 times as high the price for some things, or they do without. There isn't an alternative in our isolated market. We can't just go somewhere else. And all of this is without the checks on EU imports starting yet. Not that businesses need worry about that immediately, because as I discussed recently, the government have delayed them yet again, very late on. 3 weeks ago, businesses thought that we were going to be facing these checks, and now we're not. And the government will presumably keep delaying them as long as they can. The government have now been telling Parliament that we're going to have a world-class border in place by 2025. Doesn't that phrase send shivers down your spine? World-class. Where have we heard these Muppets use the term world-class before? Oh yes, on absolutely everything really important that they have singularly failed to deliver on. If they're true to form, our world-class border will consist of a very wide open gate with welcome written on it in many languages and an honesty box for customs declarations. But there will have to come a point when we actually tackle our post-Brexit border. For this, we have 2 choices. We can apply the measures with whatever ramshackle system the Tories can manage to duct tape together and watch the carnage to our economy in food and medicine supplies. Or we can negotiate entry into the EEA and start to move on from Brexit. The junction where we choose one of these 2 paths, I suspect, will be the next general election, which, as I say, could be in a matter of months. Could be next year. Finally, another shout out to Michael for this little gem. Someone looking at a record fair where some British traders think they'll be taking a van over to the Netherlands and selling some records. As the European nations open up more and in the wake of the pandemic, many of these traders, many of these countries actually seem to think the pandemic's gone away. But anyway, there'll be many of these traders realising that things aren't the same anymore. You can't just load up a van, move around Europe like we're in the single market. We're not in the single market. But there'll be so many traders have never known a time when we weren't in the single market. They probably just don't realise that it was the single market that allowed for that free trade. They've never had to recognise borders before for their trade because they haven't existed anywhere they can get a van. But there is no free trade anymore. It doesn't exist for third countries. And we're going to see more and more of these stories, which is just another reason why the Conservatives are gearing up hard for a general election before more people realise just what they've done to us. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.